It's interesting you use that word. I've always been curious to ask you about that word, but I'm just glad you mentioned it. Can you say a little bit about codependency and what you think of it? Because I think of that a lot in terms of when I'm having these theoretical arguments with therapists in my head about especially around the like, I need to take 50% of the space. I matter as much as the client, or like I want to
None of
be. I'm fighting
all that stuff.
I'm fighting for connection.
Okay, but
But that can all be reframed as codependency by someone who's an idiot.
okay. So here's the thing: if you teach them theory about codependency at first, up front, you'll lose them. Nothing happens because theory is layer two. So tell me a time when you felt codependent, Sam.
Oh, well, that's what I mean. I don't think I have a clear definition of in my head. I don't think I've defined it for myself. I think I can throw it on top of some
Ah,
experiences.
how about yesterday? How about yesterday when you're in the middle of the argument with your mom and Alistair and you? See, you're not even seeing that as codependency because you're seeing me describe it as the whole thing is codependency. No, it's not. Fuck no. But there are elements.
Right.
But there are elements. You had elements of codependency yesterday. Okay. So,
Oh, I just thought of a perfect example. It's when I told you that I was having those thoughts that I wish that I was going to have a psychotic break so that I could go into the psych ward with my mom so she wouldn't have to be by herself.
oh, Sam, you should write that one down on a piece of paper because when you're trying to teach somebody what codependency means, they would, if you told them, if you started, and this happens with me frequently, and you've seen it in the book, start with the idea of an example and then say, this is what defines codependency for me. What you just experienced, if you connected to me, if you've ever felt like that, in those moments, you've been codependent. Now you haven't used a layer two dictionary bullshit thing. You've done a layer 7, 9 thing.
But I really feel like I need the layer two
I'm going to
explanation of
give it
what
to
it is.
you, Cam. What
Oh,
I'm
okay.
trying to do is discourage you from going the easy but useless route of layer two at the front.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, one way is to tell that story, right? Okay. But another way, one of my favorite ways, is to tell the story of the words being born, which I use in the book. If I teach somebody how where the word was born, they keep it for life. And that's helpful because they have like a little kid's version of learning the alphabet where the alphabet letters are characters. And then that stays with them and they want it. It's pleasant. So, a minor digression. This morning I learned the original meaning for the word leech. Have you any idea where it came from, where it was born?
No.
The word leech was actually an early reference to all surgeons. It didn't mean blood-sucking worms. It meant surgeon. They were called leeches. Okay. So, codependency. Do you know where the word comes from?
Mm-mm.
So, the little history starts in the 70s when um, several authors, um, including the author of Codependency No More, become popular. Okay. So there are probably 6 or 7 authors from that era, 70s and early 80s, that have these books that are the beginning of talking about that people who love alcoholics suffer. This didn't occur before then, Sam.
That's so crazy to think about. Yeah,
Didn't
I
occur.
didn't realize it was that. I thought codependency had been around for like 80 or 100 years or something.
The word codependency is in late 80s. So 70s, early 80s, Melody Beattie's book Codependent No More comes out around the late 80s or 1990, right? Um, But there are a number of people in that era, all of whom contribute to this awareness, a growing awareness that if you grew up with an alcoholic parent, you have been affected, you suffered. If you are married to an alcoholic, you suffer. Now, that decade of books that said that, there was no word. And at first, in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, a word began to be used. They began to talk about that there needed to be a label, layer two label, for what was happening to the people who loved and were affected by somebody's alcoholism. So, the first word was co-alcoholic, because in the late 80s, they began to discover that the symptoms of the alcoholic and the symptoms of the wife of the alcoholic were all the same. Alcoholic sleep is disturbed. Codependent sleep is disturbed. Alcoholics' eating patterns are poor. Codependent's eating habits are more. Alcoholic has emotion, goes from silence to outburst to silence. Codependent, same thing. All, that's a lot, all the same symptoms. So they said this is the co-alcoholic. They don't drink, but they have alcoholism. Then, when Beatty's book came out, in that year, the word becomes codependency. And why? Because the idea gets introduced that the happiness of the other person depends on the happiness of the alcoholic. When the alcoholic's doing well, not drinking, the codependent is happy and feeling safe, right? Or when the teenage alcoholic gets sent to the rehab, the mom feels safe. So that's where the word comes from. And that little history is an important thing, because mostly when you come into a word, when it's already existed for a long time and you don't know the history, you don't know the word. And you're never going to understand the word. Your way of saying this is an example, oh my God, Sam, that you're not going to have a better example of that than that for the whole rest of your life. You might have something that's good, but that is as good as it gets, that example. But if you told the example and then you told them the little story of how it came into being, it's like a storybook. You get them to regress into like 6, 7 years old, and you have their attention and they want to understand what it is. So first you got them into 7, 9. Now you're keeping them in 7, 9 by telling them a story. And now at this point, then you say, do you have any examples of times when you've been codependent?
So does codependency have an opposite? Like, is it independent? Like, what is the?
That is really a brilliant question. What do you think, Maria?
I just keep thinking about me first and you first though, because I feel like a lot of my clients mix that word up with someone who's you first. Codependent.
But do you understand that what I'm saying this morning, this little piece of video should maybe I'll cut this out if it's okay with the two of you, and post it, because truthfully, just this little section, because this is so helpful. This idea of what we're talking about, the question is so good. The question you just asked is also so good, and so many people mix this up because they do like a dictionary definition of this. No, only if you recognize that the coexistence of the symptoms is where the co comes from.
Mm.
So this is the same thing for somebody who's profoundly mentally ill. There's so many things that this applies to. You know, this is the same thing for somebody who lives with somebody on the autism spectrum. I mean, just it's an extraordinarily useful term, even though it's very old, and it's become empty only because people don't know the history. But your question, Sam, is brilliant, because what is the opposite of that? So let's begin with this. When we're talking codependent, we are saying that the person is completely dependent on another person's happiness for their own.
Mm.
That's really something, okay? So the opposite of that would be, there are actually, there are three opposites if we make the square. And I'll just briefly say that one of the opposites would be that you feel that your happiness is entirely dependent on you.
Mm. Oh,
And that's
wow.
just as negative as having it depend entirely on somebody else. Right?
Yikes.
Right. Those two things, right? And the three of us all have some of that. We have some of both of those things, right? But we all have some of that. Okay, so that's the two negative sides of this idea. Okay, so there have to be two positive sides of this same, whatever the hub is in the wheel. Codependency is one of the boxes, right? And pathologically independent, which is how I've referred to myself, is one of the other two boxes. And Maria, you certainly have had that in spades, right? And you too, Sam, at times. So those are those two. But what about the two positives? What are the two positive sides of dependency? Because that's really what this is. This is the map, the emergence logical geometry of dependency, right? In relationships. Okay. So what are some positives about dependency in relationships? Is it a good thing that you need other people?
Well, like Jean was reading that book. I told Sam about it. Something about how the health of your own mind is the health of your children's mind, or something like this, right? So I'm thinking about it in that way, but then again, I go back to you first. I can't get away from like
But
my kids' needs. So I have to
okay,
get my own mind healthy.
okay. Let me get rid of that in a moment. Codependency has nothing to do with being you first. If a child is a one and the mother is a one, when the child's 3 years old, there are tantrums, but interspliced with the tantrums are a fear that if the mother isn't happy, they're going to suffer. So a child who's a two with a one mother is constantly afraid that the mother's going to get upset and they want to help. But the child who's a one constantly wants the mother happy, because when they're happy, then they get to be happy. There's space. Okay, that idea is independent of that it's happening is independent of me first or you first. It just
I
has,
don't know how it could be though.
it is. Okay, let me.
I mean, I can tell you, Clancy is so like. Now we're talking about like Clancy. If Clancy just had a great day and then she calls me on the phone and I'm in a shit mood, she goes into a shit mood instantly. And then she blames me because she can't help but go where I go, and she gets angry at me for spoiling her mood.
Okay,
And that's there's this sort of.
so that falls into this category, even though I'm resistant to the word only because it has baggage and it's empty. But that's codependency. If you are unhappy,
Absolutely.
she's unhappy. All right. Now, what I'm trying to say, Maria, is, okay, let me go back to the simple thing. What's character type? What is it the measure of? Character type.
Whose needs you're seeing?
Okay, let me be a little bit more specific about it. Character type is an urge, not behavior. You know this, but you forget it, right? So character type is an urge. The urge is it's not an urge to do. It is an urge to look in a direction. For you and I, when we sense neediness in ourselves, we don't see it as neediness in ourselves. We see it as the neediness of something outside ourselves. There's where we look. Even when we have neediness, we're looking outside. That's an urge. Okay. How is that about codependency?
Well, like if Gene is sitting there unhappy,
Yes.
I feel like I want to give him something.
That's because you have a character type and it's a 2. That's true. How is your urge to give him something codependency?
I don't know. That's why I can't get them.
But here's where the confusion lies. If you can't tip it, if you cannot see the difference, and I don't mean the difference in a dictionary, if it can't be tipped clearly, if there isn't a measure to clearly tip it, then you don't really know the nature of the thing. So right now you have, okay, Sam, so you know, Maria
I
just,
don't hear you.
what's that? Yeah.
I can.
So Sam, so what just happened is Maria is asking, the question has come down to when Gina is unhappy and Maria feels urges to give him something.
Sex.
I asked him, is that asked her, is that codependency? And she said, I don't.
What'd she say?
And she said, I don't.
Okay.
And then I said, and this is this idea that if you cannot have a tipping point based measure, then you don't understand the nature of what you're talking about. So if you cannot tip normal urges to give from the idea that your entire being, the happiness of your entire being depends on somebody else's being happy. Okay, what you're saying is, yes, because you're a 2, if Gene's unhappy, you feel urges to do something to, to make him feel better. Yes, those urges in those moments, that's your focus. But 2 minutes later, you could be focusing on the needs of Maple, or the garbage man and the can is too far from the road, or whatever. So code.
So is the time spent in that space?
No. Okay. So both Sam and I have had hallucinations of spiritual, I don't know what you would call them, craziness.
It's hard to call them spiritual because it makes it seem like they're better than they. It doesn't.
That's,
anyway.
There's that word. Spiritual for you has a positive spin. There's no negative, right? For me, spiritual is one of the 4 ways the mind thinks. Spiritual. It's not a fact, a story, or an idea, then it's spiritual. Okay, it's a feeling. But Sam and I have both had these spiritual events, right? So why are we not, for instance, schizophrenic or diagnosably hallucinating, right, when we have them? Why not? What's the difference?
It's a good question.
The symptoms are the same. See, this is again, now Maria, are you getting that how much you need tipping points when you are trying to understand?
Yeah.
Without them, you can't understand. It is not a matter of if Steve tells you enough information, you will finally get it. Yes, that occasionally happens. But then if you have to teach this to somebody else, you can't. In order to teach, you must have tipping points. Without them, you have no way of understanding. So now we are doing the one between the urges that a you first person feels when they're in the presence of someone else suffering, and codependency. So the first piece that I would say is that codependency falls outside the framework of time. When you are codependent, the majority of your personality, I could say all, but there are probably exceptions, but the majority of your personality is affected by that person's happiness.
Like my mom is 110% codependent upon my brother.
That's right. except that now,
But can I jump in here with a question? Are you saying that codependency is always personality size? There's not like event-based codependency?
yes, Sam, you just weld me up.
Interesting.
You just weld me up. This is why you two are in this position. Because this dialogue that the three of us have, these are the things that will go into school. Yes, codependency is personality sized, and urges to give a person, even very intense ones, are event sized. And that really is the difference. That's a tipping point, Sam. It's easy to see the difference between event sized and personality sized. It's a tipping point. Easy to see. This is not something that takes a great amount of assessment.
But can you heal it? I mean, I don't know how to say it in a better way than that. I want to just ask directly, can you heal it?
What do you mean, can you feel it? Can you feel the tip?
Heal it.
Okay, yes.
Oh, that's good.
Good, but now watch this. And here right now, I feel so, I so wish I had the diagnostic manual, because this is stuff that will go in it. And if I die before I do it, one of you has to do this. Okay. So I told you that 4 sections in the book. What are all the qualities of personality that are measurable? What are the 4 minority personalities? Because there's an uneven distribution of some of those qualities. That's the first half. And there's nothing there that's treatable. Second half of the book. Personality size disorders. And then the last of the 4 sections, event size disorders. Disorder is described as a disorder of the mind and the life. Disordered, an inability to organize. Okay, so an inability to organize that's personality sized, an inability to organize that is event sized. Now, interestingly, in the measurable qualities of personality, and then the 4 minority personalities, there are people who fall and waver back and forth, like your father, Maria, waver back and forth, which are not fully a minority personality, but they have so much of it that they're in the almost category. So they're wavering between majority and minority personality.
Maria, which one is your dad almost in?
I think he's definitely OCD though, Steve.
Yes, he is. But what I'm saying to you is, he isn't 100. I wouldn't give him the diagnosis. He simply has so much of it that it's notable. Your brother is so clearly a minority personality. He's nothing else. Okay, but the wavering is what I'm going to point out now about disorders. So the wavering happens in disorders in a way that Sam's question, which is one of these questions that he and I had at the beginning, and I had it, is, are there things you can't heal? Right, this question. And I've said to you, Sam, well, I hope you find a way, but I have come to believe that I can't. Okay, but it's not to say I can't improve. So personality size disorder, schizophrenia, and bipolar are the 2 extreme. That's the continuum. And then all personality size disorders draw from category A and category B. Right? It's so tips. Schizophrenia is the mostly mind, almost no emotion, and the bipolar is almost all the emotion. Where the disorder is, it's not so much the mind. Okay, but drawn from that are all disorders. Now, what is in that category? Well, active alcoholism is a personality size disorder, but it is different than those 2 things. Well, why? Because when you have sufficient healing of a person with alcoholism, you and I, Sam, then you move into that what's left are multiple remnants of event-sized disorder. So you have moved from personality-sized to event-sized disorders, a cluster, right? A cluster of them, but nonetheless, you no longer have a personality-sized disorder. And the thing in AA that they talk about, the 3 to 5 years, if you work hard, that's the time when generally you move from personality-sized disorder, alcoholism, into a cluster of event-sized disorders. So now,
So codependency follows that same.
brilliant. Yes,
Oh,
that's
that's
right.
good. That's lucky. I'm glad to hear that there's help. There's
So
hope.
codependency is a personality-sized disorder and should be in the diagnostic manual. And then as they move, right, 3 to 5 years, Al-Anon, work, whole thing, as they move, it becomes a cluster of event-sized disorders. In these particular situations, they revert to that codependent thing, but for the most part, they don't.
Very interesting. But I still don't know what the other two positives are. So we have the codependency that I am totally responsible for my happiness. They're totally responsible for my happiness. But what are I just can't even imagine what the positives are.
Well, I can give you one. Have you any thought, Maria? A positive about it?
I just started with the one about like taking care of yourself so the other person's happy. I don't know.
Well, okay. That could be parlayed into one. Yes.
No
So,
one's responsible for my happiness?
no, that's on the bottom. I am the only, no one else is responsible for my happiness. And you know how often?
No, I just mean nobody at all. I meant nobody, like me and nobody else, like just nobody responsible for
No,
it.
because the hub of the wheel is dependence in relationships.
Oh, right.
The wheel is not whether you're happy. Okay, right. But this is important. When you ask the question, is this one of the things, it has to attach to the hub in one of the 4 realms. So to understand this one, go back to dynamic range. What kind of movement in the range of the possible range, dynamic range, is necessary to have an emergence?
Are you just talking about like 7 to 10?
Yes, but dynamic range is not 7 to 10. Dynamic range can be in every layer. Okay, all the way from the top to the bottom, you hit the bottom, which is the trampoline, you bounce back up to the top and go, wee! That movement, which isn't layer dependent right now, it is 7, 8, 9, 10. But what we're including in this is, right? What we're including in this is 10, 9, 8, 7, which is the reliving of the wound, and 7, 8, 9, 10, which is the emergence from the wound. The complete thing, which isn't even in the blue book, the complete thing is 10, 9, 8, 7, 7, 8, 9, 10. The part of it that's the emergence is 7, 8, 9, 10. The part of it that is the wound is 10, 9, 8, 7. That's the reliving of the wound. And to actually be a therapist, 10, 9, 8, 7, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, what is the upside of codependence? Codependence is the motherfucking way down. If you do it well, it's the trampoline into self-care. The trampoline. It is, I'm fucking exhausted. I can't take this anymore. Yes, you can. You can even go more. I know you got it in you. Fuck you. And man, that's the turning point. That's the turning point because they're edging on 4. And if you can get them into their feelings immediately right there, 7, 8, 9, 10. So healing codependency requires that you heal enough of the events in the personality size thing to have it be sporadic as opposed to constant. There's still going to be a cluster, right? But now, so what is happening to Maria's mother right now, who has been the queen of codependency with her brother? What is happening?
She's spiraling to the trampoline.
Well, she's been on that trampoline for years.
Oh,
And
God.
she stopped
Jesus
jumping a
Christ.
while ago. She's just been on the trampoline. She's probably been laying face down on the trampoline. Right. Embracing it, kissing it, and praying, please get me off this fucking trampoline. Okay. No. The minute that your need rivaled Ryan's need, your mother fucking is celebrating. Well, why? Because that codependency that she has a source that she can affect. When she sees you happy that she's there, when she sees you receiving care, oh, your mother is in heaven. Heaven. There's no her, but she's in heaven. So that's what's happening right now. And this is probably the first time in 25 years that your mother has not been on that trampoline.
Bia, does your mother know she's in heaven?
I don't know.
I think that what she is doing, typical too, is that she can only sense her needs through seeing the needs in another. And I think that her need to be a mother, because this is what the codependency is rooted in, her child, seeing Maria and thinking about how Maria is falling in love with this idea of becoming a mother means that her mother can see and experience the upside of being a mother for the first time in a long, long time.
Oh, God. Jesus.
Yep.
Mm.
So, and I know that because Rita was standing next, in the room with Maria. She came into the room, and she was there, not going to be on camera, typical you first. And I called her name and said hi, and she comes over and she said, and I said, "Would you get Maria to call a doctor? She's throwing up every day." And she was so happy, Sam, like she was ecstatic. She'd go, "Yes, yes, I've been telling her yes," because for a moment there were two people who were trying to get Maria to meet her needs, and she didn't have to only be the mother. Yeah. So this idea about codependency, what an awesome topic this is. And go back to thinking about this, that part of us doing emergence as a therapy, regardless of the form, is to teach the person their nature.
Mm.
Ultimately, that's the meta goal that's in every emergence therapy. Have I taught the person more about their nature? That's completely different from have I relieved their symptoms? Have I fixed the wound? The focus on wounds is not what emergence therapies do. The focus is on teaching people their natures because that gives them their independence, that frees them from the slavery of that if they do the right thing, they will stop suffering. Like it's so different.
Mm.
And to be able to say that as a tipping point, what does your therapy seek to do? Make people feel better, heal their injuries, right? Blah, 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 right? And what does our therapy do? We teach people their nature because a person who knows their own nature has a good life. They understand the nature of suffering even when they're suffering, and they become curious to even learn more about the suffering.
I
Getting
mean,
rid
it
of
just reminds me of that article you sent me, The Revenge of Freud, where they're doing those long-term things. And the long-term psychoanalysis people had no symptom reduction, and they're actually reported more suffering, but they were more okay with the more suffering, where the
that,
CBT people their suffering came back double, and they couldn't tolerate it when it came back. It was like it was like the worst case scenario, basically.
That's right. That's right, Sam. So that article, you got exactly what I was trying to show you, but I sent you that because of that book that I keep annoying you that you're going to write.
Yeah,
Right? But
significant.
because you are the one who can write that book, Sam, because you have a natural joy when you see those connections, because you love those famous therapists as much as I do. And you know what? None of them have gotten the proper fucking credit. None of them to be fucking named in a layer 2 Psych 101 journal, and they have no people argue about which one is good. Fuck that. Not and
Yeah,
nobody
no, it's so crazy, man. It's so
nobody
crazy.
even
The people
knows.
don't appreciate it. It's like no one appreciates that you go to a coffee shop and you hear the people next to you going, "I think my husband's projecting." It's like, do you know that where that word projecting came from? Like, do you understand the magnitude of the discoveries and the
That's
words that these people have come up with? It's like
and,
they're describing nature.
and the other side, Sam. You can only know the magnitude when you can imagine a time when no one knew that word. Imagine. Now imagine what I've taught you about codependency. That there was a time when it wasn't known, and you thought it's been known for 100 years, you said. No,
I just assumed that.
right. And the idea that it's only in the 70s and 80s that they begin to even realize that the person's affected by being around an alcoholic. What the fuck were they thinking of?
I don't know. And tell me about a little bit just to close out my understanding of it. What is the codependency is a part of nature from when you're a baby, or is there a particular age where you're just totally in like is there a specific age where you would experience your parent like the way an alcoholic, a partner of an alcoholic, like you're saying, they have the sleep, they have the all the same symptoms. Like, is there an age where I have all the same symptoms as my parents, basically?
I think, Sam, that I can give you an easy answer. I will in a moment, but I'd rather that you think about it, ask yourself that question.
I have, and I don't know. I mean, I just feel like so much of childhood is like that, where you're so, at least when I observe my friends that have kids, it just seems like it just, it always seems to be there, basically. I don't, you know.
And do you realize that when parents have no life, they're codependent and it's personality sized? It affects their sleep, it affects their eating, it affects their thinking, it affects their digestion, it affects everything, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, it's so deep. I was in the supermarket with my mother yesterday, and we had just spent all this time with my great aunt. And my mother, when she's with my great aunt, is really tracking her. And she said she kept having these flashes of worrying about my great aunt. And even though my great aunt wasn't there, and she said she still was looking for her. And she said it was like that when I was little too. Like she would be away from me for a day and be somewhere, and then just constantly be looking for me, like if it was there. And it was not like it was real. It was like sort of like how you describe PTSD, where you literally go there. She like literally was certain I was there with her, and she had to watch me.
So this is important, Sam, because you did another thing that I have been trying to instill in you, which is if you want to understand something in human nature, you must go to child development and you must find a time when it was normal. And
Yeah, that's what I want. A time where it's not broken to be codependent, where it's not
okay,
gonna
and that
mess with our
time,
functioning.
okay, and that time is the first 4 years of life of a child and the reaction of the parents. The child has a personality sized disorder. And my definition, the child is incapable of organizing their thoughts and their actions. By 4, the child begins to be somewhat able, right? In the 5th year of life, between 4 and onward, the child begins to be able to organize some of their time, etc. Right? This is why preschool at age 4 is fine, because the child can begin to organize what's going on in the room. Okay, but the first 4 years of life, Sam, the child has a personality size disorder. Early childhood is a personality size disorder. And the parents, if they are at all good parents, and I'm saying that word good, they are codependent. And that codependency is personality sized. Then, as the child grows, the child becomes more well ordered. And
Wait
the
a second
parents,
though. Can you develop codependent? So someone can develop codependency outside of. It doesn't necessarily. It's not rooted in the first 7 years of their life. I'm talking about the parent.
okay, you cannot say it without both halves, Sam. The
Okay,
normal
fair enough.
time for a child and parents to have that relationship of a personality size disorder. The children have the personality size disorder, birth to 4. The parents have the personality size codependency. They have the code disorder, early childhood code disorder. Now, that first 4 years of life. Now, do you think it's a coincidence? Okay, for instance, that years ago, I had a guy come who was 30 years old, who the parents had paid everything they have to get him in rehabs, to pay for therapy, right? The parents came for a session. The mother, I can still see the mother. And I'm saying to them, he now is in court. He's arrested for dealing cocaine. He's going to jail. And I'm saying to the parents, after they give me the history, look, you have to let him go. And the mother says, I can't. He's going to die in jail if I let him go. And you know what they did, Sam? They sold their house. These people are in their late 50s and they sold their house. Somebody hearing this video will probably say they were good parents. And I would say, no, they were horrible parents.
No way. Oh my
Because
God,
they
that's
could
so
not
bad.
they didn't have the strength inside them to, okay, let me frame it with what I just told you about early childhood. They did not have the strength to stop seeing their 30-year-old son as no longer 3 years old. They saw him as helpless and unable to grow as a baby. And in that state of mind, they had a personality size disorder, and he had a personality size disorder, his addiction, and they had codependency, right? But that mirrors the way that human nature causes parents to be responsible for young children. In early childhood, it's necessary because the need is of a baby. The baby is
Right,
not
I totally see. So it's like they have that same need that when he was 3, but it doesn't fit at all. It's like so crazy. It's not what's needed at all. It's like actually it's making, and all it does is it almost makes the person be 3 years old in some way. Like it's almost just.
Sam, it actually encourages regression in the addict, an alcoholic. It encourages regression, that you treat them like a baby. And so there is this circular loop. Remember the feedback loop, regression transference, right? The feedback loop that is here between codependent parents and an adult alcoholic. The feedback loop is that they see this 30-year-old man as a child, young child, and he acts like a young child. That's the
What a
feedback loop.
nightmare.
So now this is
It makes me appreciate my parents, that's for sure. Because the last time I relapsed, I told them I can't do it. I'm going to relapse. And my mother, she got a good training from Karen, and so she would just say, "You're gone. You can't live here. No money, no support. That's it." And I would go, and my grandma said this. They had a whole united front. Everybody would say, "You're cut. You can't live here. You're on the street," and that's it. And that was really the right thing to do. I mean, it must have been so hard too, because my mother and my grandmother are pretty codependent with me.
so then
yeah, I mean, it must have been so. They must have been so strong to do that.
well, think about this. Yes, 100%. Absolutely, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother, she really just imitated. I mean, when I remember going to collect my things when I was just going to go live with Mike and John,
Yeah.
and she just was totally imitating the boundary. Like she wanted to just let me live with her and drink, and
Right. She had damage control. You're correct. That's right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the thing about though is this. Think about the reaction of your mother and father after you had been seeing me a little while. that was the same as Rita seeing me say to her, "Are you going to get her to go to the doctor?" That's the first time, Sam. That's the first time that your parents had relief that you weren't going to die without somebody who could help you talking to you. I don't mean from the first time. Your dad, he was desperate. And he came to me at his wedding and asked me, right? This is what's on his mind, his wedding to Trish. And he comes over and basically begs me and tells me he's going to pay me and this and that. And me being me, because it's me, I said, the only way I'll take this on is if you don't pay. Let me do this. And I can picture us having this exchange. But this is
What an ambivalence that must have created in him about the not paying. Oh
that's right. This is me saying, in effect, you're not taking this all on. This is not, well, you just found the right person, right? But you have to monitor it. You're not fucking going to know anything that's going on. This is not on you. Right. But I'm saying is that's the first time. In the first holiday season, after you had been seeing me, your mom and Alistair sent me this box filled with all these beautiful objects, right? That's
Yeah.
the first time that your mother didn't have that all on her shoulders.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So both of
true.
your parents were extremely codependent, but they also were, through sheer willpower and damage control and whatever, at times, especially your mother, they let you be responsible. They didn't treat you like a baby,
Yeah.
you know?
It's absolutely true.
So,
Yeah. And she learned that the hard way because they did let me just basically, not my father, but my mother did let me use but like before had a break and went to rehab. She was sort of totally just let me do anything I wanted, basically.
but your father was
So that really
codependent
shifted.
about forcing you to meetings, pressuring you to go to meetings.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I refused to get sober, he just left. He moved to California. I mean, he just because he was just like he couldn't have a relationship with me because I wouldn't stop using. I mean, he just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like he couldn't live with me using because he just couldn't take where it was. You know, he was certain about where it was going, and I'm sure he was right in some ways. But I mean, he started taking me to meetings when I was 10, getting me ready. You know.
So, is there any part of this that you want me to cut out? Because this only the part today that I am of the video that about codependency. Sam, this is one of the most powerful videos that we've ever had, the three of us. And not the stuff at the beginning.
No, that's what I was saying. I would just say if I was cutting it, I would just say from the minute you said the word codependency and then I got excited because I had been wanting to bring that topic up with you. From that point on, I feel like everything's fine with me.
Is it okay with you, Maria?
I think so.
Okay. Because there shouldn't be anything here that's about somebody else being horrible. And the real things that we're saying, like, Sam, if your mother heard this video and you saying how courageous she was to do that, she'd probably cry. And she
Oh
deserved
yeah.
to know that. You know what I mean? And if your
Oh
mother
yeah, no, I've totally.
heard this thing about us talking about how hard it's been for her with your brother all this time, she'd probably cry too. The three of us welled up when we're talking about it. I can't imagine what they would feel. You know? Yeah.